Page 322. If this does not happen, however, then an Ausartung into the negative or positive occurs, in which case Ausartungen are, however, against nature in every case and in every direction. Only an equalizedness of the negative-positive is natural and logical, of permanent benefit, and of real value. Real positive thinking, therefore, means thinking neutral positively, therefore not contrarily and not speaking against a matter. Neutral positive thinking, therefore, means that a really fully neutral material must be used for the thinking, something which is in no wise in any relation to the terrible thing. But how does one now really think neutral positively? How does that come about? And what are the possibilities? Although the neutral positive thinking is very easy, there is still a certain difficulty in the fact that the terrible thing in the subconscious must be contained and neutralized. This means that the consciousness with a stricken psyche must begin to govern over the subconscious until the subconscious acknowledges the trains of thought of the consciousness as knowledge/fact. To achieve this, it takes very great effort at the beginning, because the subconscious constantly tries to push through the overburdening terrible thing. Therefore, it is absolutely necessary that the constant attempts of the subconscious to penetrate and push through are pushed aside intensively and stoically, and are displaced with neutral body of thoughts, or with a neutral positive wishful dream, through which slowly but surely a superposition and neutralization of the terrible thing in the subconscious ensues. The best neutral positive thinking is a wishful dream, but however, other neutral positive body of thoughts can also be used. But it should be said that a wishful dream is simpler and easier to use for very many human beings than any other neutral positive thinking material. Neutral positive thinking goods also mean that the thinking material must not have an iota touching upon the existing terrible thing or suffering. Therefore, it must never be thought, quote, "When I am healthy again, I will do this or that," etc., because the subconscious must never be reminded of the existing terrible thing or suffering. So, for example, a rose forms a neutral positive thinking good, because when thoughts about this rose are nurtured, then these have in no wise anything to do with the existing terrible thing or suffering. Thereby, the subconscious is no longer made attentive to the terrible thing or suffering, and it can slowly but surely recover. But if autosuggestion or Coué method is used, then the subconscious is thereby constantly fed with the new poison, because upon the desire of, quote, health, the subconscious must automatically answer with, quote, illness, because something opposite always calls forth the opposite again. Upon something neutral, however, the subconscious is only able to in turn answer with the neutral. Therefore, it simply ignores all existing terrible things and sufferings, and thereby slowly neutralizes. Just as it is the case with the psychic illness with the human being, it is likewise with the effects of the religion within him or her. As long as the human being does not take a neutral position towards the religion, for so long he or she will never find and recognize the truth of the spirit and the creation. As long as he or she does not free him or herself in the subconscious from all teachings and irrational teachings of the religion, and does not face it in a fully neutral and neutral-seeking manner, for so long he or she remains dependent on it and confusingly led by it. Only the neutrality to all things and factors guarantees a free thinking process without prejudice, which leads to the truth. If the thinking material is, however, influenced by any doubts, prejudices, or belief views, etc., then one is not able to think neutrally. Consequently, also, no uninfluenced determination can be found. Only the absolutely neutral thinking form guarantees an unprejudiced finding of the real determination and the truth. This therefore means that all things, no matter what they concern, must always and without exception be worked out exclusively by an absolutely neutral mode of thinking in order to lead to the real truth. If a human being is influenced religiously, then he or she is never able to think neutrally and honestly in spiritual and consciousness-based concerns, because his or her belief views and influences do not allow this. Thoughts conceived or appearing in this form must inevitably go astray in a religious prejudice, through which every way to the truth is obstructed. If the human being therefore wants to find the effective truth, then he or she must explore all ways, possibilities, and aspects, etc., in a fully neutral thinking manner. However, if they are influenced by any belief views, etc., then the truth remains lost to them for the duration of their life, or at least for so long until they free themselves from prejudices or belief views, etc. This is the way of the researching which leads to the truth, and there is no other. It is now left up to each human being to act accordingly. The human being is only then able to be really healthy in a psychical and consciousness-based manner if he or she is able to think and act in a manner that is naturally right, according to creational laws and recommendations. However, this requires that the human being knows the truth and is clear that he or she must never think and act along religious lines. He or she must be conscious that the creation alone means the highest in all things, and must never be confounded or equated with the human God being. The creation is that which is responsible for the entire universe and all life. It is the most immense and greatest power which the human being can only ever imagine. The creation is the being and non-being of the life. It is the most immense mass of spiritual energy which can exist in this universe. It is spirit in purest form and unmeasurable in its wisdom. Although the creation is, however, the relatively most absolutely fully developed which the human being knows or believes to know, it must incessantly further develop itself and continuously further relatively absolutely fulfill itself. Thus, the creation incessantly and constantly creates smallest new spirit clusters, which then enliven the human body as spirit forms. This spirit form then has its mission to fulfill therein, that in innumerable rebirths it incessantly further develops and advances, and in the course of unmeasurable periods of time reaches the relative absolute fulfillment. If this then has happened through innumerable lives, then the spirit form returns to the creation and becomes one with it, through which the creation itself further relatively absolutely fulfills itself and becomes ever more immense. The spirit in the human being, however, is fully unknowing and devoid at its beginning, so it must slowly store knowledge and wisdom within itself and develop itself. The more lives the spirit form has put behind itself, the more knowing and wiser it becomes. And solely true spiritual knowledge and true spiritual wisdom from the consciousness of the human being and his or her life. From this, one is to recognize: the more humanly and worldly a human being thinks and acts, the more underdeveloped he or she is in the consciousness, because purely humanly and worldly thinking means that a human being thinking in such a manner stands on a still primary and primitive step of the evolution. In general, the masses of the humankind are quite consciously held at this step by religions, authorities, and governments, etc. This is partly because they themselves are not taught any better, but partly also because through this, the human being can be enslaved and suppressed to the greatest measure. The most terrible machinations in this regard are thereby practiced by the religions which undermine the self-confidence of the human being, and through cunning and treachery drive him or her to a false submissiveness before an imaginary God. God, however, is first of all not the creation, and secondly, he has no influence on the consciousness life of the human beings. For willing and comprehending and truth-loving human beings, this can be proven if they are responsive to logic. God is a human being, which even Emmanuel, or alias Jesus Christ, has already said. God is a designation for a human being who stands above kings and emperors in a consciousness-based manner. God means, literally translated into the German language, King of Wisdom. And Emmanuel already said at that time, quote, God is a human being like any other human being. Above God, however, stands the creation, immeasurably higher than he or she, for the creation alone is the unmeasurable secret. These words, however, are not to be found in any, quote, holy scripture, for they were quite simply falsified and fraudulently rendered by the book writers, because the truth would inevitably have destroyed every image of the religion. This does not only apply to the Christianity, but to all religions. If the human being wants to rightly think and know, then he or she may solely and exclusively only acknowledge the creation as the highest and greatest power, and to speak in prayers, if this lies in the will or need of the human being, which is, however, never demanded or would ever be decreed by the creation. The creation, which according to human understanding would analogously be God, has not the least to do with the God of a religion. It is naturally very strange to the human being when he or she suddenly should no longer, quote, believe in a God, but rather in the creation. It is, however, just as strange to him or her when he or she should no longer direct their prayers, insofar as he or she has a need, to any imaginary saints, or to shrines, or to Christ or God, but rather directly to the creation. But it is recommended for every human being to once dare this attempt, in which case he or she will suddenly make the peculiar realization that his or her consciousness begins to form fully differently, and that a tremendous calm comes over him or her. And this human being who dares to make this attempt then also makes the realization that his or her prayers are now suddenly heard, and his or her life turns towards the goodness and happiness. This is, however, no miracle, because when the creation is spoken to, then automatically the spirit within the human being, him or herself, is also thereby spoken to, which is, after all, a part piece of the creation itself. The creation is truly the most magnificent which stands above all life, and it alone is absolutely worthy enough to be respected, honored, and recognized by the human being as creation. The worship and veneration of a God, however, as the religions are able to offer, is against nature and false, and foreign to all creational laws and recommendations. But whoever knows this, and nevertheless continues in religious paths, acts consciously against all creational laws and recommendations, and holds back his or her way of the consciousness-based evolution towards the relative absolute fulfillment, the way of the spiritual knowledge and the creational wisdom.